We live in a world obsessed with motivation. We chase it, consume it, measure it, and post about it. We reward it with bonuses, promotions, likes, and applause. And yet, despite all this effort, motivation keeps fading. People burn out. Teams disengage. Leaders lose trust. Organizations hit targets but feel empty. And the question we rarely stop to ask is not how to motivate people, but why motivation disappears in the first place. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Motivation fades when it is built on outcomes instead of purpose. When we are driven only by what we want to achieve, acquire, or prove, the energy is temporary. Success feels good, but only briefly. Power feels validating, but only until fear takes over. Progress feels exciting, but only until we realize we are moving fast in a direction that no longer feels meaningful. This is the gap so many of us feel today, the gap between success and fulfillment, between influence and integrity, between growth and meaning. We are doing everything we were told would make us happy, yet something feels off. Not because we are incapable or ungrateful, but because we were never meant to be fueled by results alone. Human beings are not inspired by what we do. We are inspired by why we do it. When we forget our why, motivation turns into pressure. Work becomes a transaction. Leadership becomes control. Progress becomes a race with no finish line. And the systems we build, companies, governments, schools, even families, begin to prioritize performance over people, numbers over trust, speed over sustainability. This is why burnout is no longer an individual problem. It is a systemic one. Burnout happens when people are asked to give more of themselves to something that gives little meaning in return. Disconnection happens when efficiency replaces empathy. Inequality grows when leaders optimize for short-term wins instead of long-term well-being. Fear-based leadership emerges when those in power feel responsible for results but disconnected from purpose. And fear is a terrible motivator. Fear can drive compliance, but it cannot inspire commitment. Fear can produce quick results, but it destroys trust. Fear creates cultures where people protect themselves instead of each other, where innovation dies quietly, and where motivation survives only as long as consequences exist. The most dangerous part is that these systems often look successful from the outside. Revenue grows, influence expands, metrics improve. But beneath the surface, people are exhausted, cynical, and replaceable. When leaders prioritize results over humans, they may win the quarter, but they weaken the future, because no system can outperform the health of the people inside it. The irony is that we already know a better way. We know that the strongest teams are built on trust, not pressure. We know that people will give more of themselves when they feel seen, safe, and valued. We know that leaders who serve their people, not their ego, not their image, create organizations that endure. We know that purpose is not a slogan, it is a responsibility. Purpose is what gives sacrifice meaning. It is what allows people to endure hardship without losing themselves. It is what turns a job into a calling and a group into a community. When people understand why they come to work, why their effort matters, and who they are serving, motivation stops being something leaders try to extract and starts becoming something people generate themselves. But purpose does not magically appear. It must be articulated, protected, and lived, especially when it is inconvenient. Rediscovering our why requires courage. It requires leaders to slow down in a world addicted to speed. It requires individuals to question definitions of success that no longer fit. It requires organizations to design systems that serve human beings, not just shareholders or statistics. And it requires all of us to think long-term in a culture that rewards the next win, not the next generation. Hope does not come from better incentives. It comes from better intentions. Responsibility does not begin with authority. It begins with choice. Each of us has a role to play. As individuals, we must reconnect with the values that make our work meaningful beyond survival or status. As leaders, we must measure success not only by what we achieve, but by the people we elevate, protect, and develop. As communities, we must demand systems that reward integrity, cooperation, and service, not just performance. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in our charge. And when people feel taken care of, motivation does not need to be forced. It becomes natural, sustainable, resilient. The hidden reason motivation always fades is not laziness or lack of discipline. It fades when people are asked to give their energy to something that has forgotten its soul. But the moment we remember our why clearly, consistently, and collectively, something changes. Work regains meaning. Trust is rebuilt. And leadership becomes an act of service rather than control. The call to action is simple, but not easy. Think long-term. Choose empathy over ego. Build together instead of competing alone. And commit every day to becoming the kind of leader at work, at home, in society who serves something bigger than themselves. Because when we lead with purpose, motivation doesn't fade. It multiplies. Motivation fades when it is driven by outcomes instead of purpose, because outcomes are finite, fragile, and external, while purpose is enduring, resilient, and deeply human. Outcomes tell us what we want to achieve, but they do not tell us why it matters. They give direction, but not meaning. When people wake up every day chasing targets, numbers, titles, or applause, their energy depends entirely on winning the next milestone. The moment the goal is reached, motivation evaporates. And when the goal is missed, motivation collapses into fear, shame, or self-doubt. This is why so many high performers feel empty even at the peak of success. They did everything right. They worked harder, stayed longer, sacrificed more. They achieved what they were told would make them fulfilled. And yet, the satisfaction is brief. The celebration ends quickly. The pressure returns. Another goal replaces the last one. Another finish line moves further away. Motivation becomes a cycle of adrenaline and exhaustion rather than a steady sense of commitment. Outcomes are seductive because they are measurable. They look objective. They give leaders something to point to and reward. But human beings are not machines, and performance is not the same as belief. You can incentivize behavior, but you cannot incentivize passion. You can demand results, but you cannot command inspiration. When outcomes become the primary driver, people start working for the reward rather than for the reason. Effort becomes transactional. Loyalty becomes conditional. Trust becomes fragile. Purpose works differently. Purpose gives context to effort. It answers the question that outcomes never can, why this matters beyond me. When people understand the cause they are contributing to, motivation no longer depends on immediate wins. It becomes anchored to identity and values. People endure setbacks because the mission is bigger than the moment. They push through uncertainty because they believe in the direction, not just the destination. This is why organizations that obsess over quarterly results often struggle with engagement, while those grounded in purpose build loyalty that survives downturns. When leaders speak only in metrics, people feel like numbers. When leaders speak about meaning, people feel seen. The absence of purpose creates a vacuum. And into that vacuum rush stress, comparison, and fear. People begin to ask, consciously or unconsciously, why they should care beyond survival. And when that question goes unanswered, motivation slowly drains away. Burnout is often misunderstood as working too hard. In reality, burnout is working hard without feeling that the work means something. It is giving energy to outcomes that feel disconnected from personal values or human impact. People can work incredibly long hours for a cause they believe in and feel alive. They can work reasonable hours for a cause they do not believe in and feel depleted. The difference is not effort. It is purpose. Outcome-driven cultures also distort leadership. When leaders are judged primarily by results, they begin to prioritize control over trust. Pressure replaces empathy. Speed replaces reflection. Short-term wins are rewarded even if they create long-term damage. In these environments, people learn to protect themselves rather than support each other. Creativity declines because risk feels unsafe. Honesty disappears because bad news threatens outcomes. Motivation survives only as long as fear remains effective. Purpose-driven leadership reverses this dynamic. When the why is clear, leaders make decisions with people in mind, not just performance. They invest in trust before they need it. They create environments where individuals feel safe to speak, fail, and grow. In such systems, motivation does not rely on constant external stimulation. It comes from belonging to something meaningful and being part of a shared cause. On a personal level, the same principle applies. When individuals tie their self-worth to outcomes alone, motivation becomes unstable. Success inflates the ego. Failure crushes it. Purpose provides balance. It allows people to measure progress not just by what they achieve, but by who they are becoming and how they are contributing. It transforms work from a means of validation into an expression of values. Motivation fades when outcomes are treated as the reason instead of the result. Outcomes are important, but they are the proof of progress, not the source of energy. Purpose is what fuels consistency when results are slow and resolve when conditions are hard. Without purpose, motivation is borrowed. With purpose, motivation is sustained. When individuals and organizations remember why they exist beyond profit, praise, or position, effort gains meaning. People stop asking what they get and start asking how they serve. Goals still matter, but they no longer define worth. Results still matter, but they no longer dominate decisions. Motivation stops being something that needs to be constantly renewed and becomes something that is lived, carried, and protected every day by people who believe their work stands for something that matters. Success without a clear why often feels like forward motion with no sense of arrival. From the outside, everything appears to be working. Goals are being met. Careers are advancing. Recognition is growing. But internally, something begins to erode. Energy drains faster than it can be restored. Enthusiasm turns into obligation. Pride turns into pressure. When success is pursued without a deeper reason, it stops nourishing the human spirit and starts consuming it. Burnout is not the result of ambition. It is the result of ambition without meaning. People can endure extraordinary challenges when they believe in the purpose behind their effort. Without that belief, even small demands feel heavy. Each task becomes another item on a never-ending list rather than a meaningful contribution. Over time, the body may still function, but the mind disengages and the heart withdraws. The work continues, but the person is no longer fully present in it. Disconnection falls closely behind burnout. When individuals do not understand why their work matters beyond personal gain or external validation, they begin to feel isolated from the outcome, from their colleagues, and from themselves. Relationships become transactional. Collaboration becomes competitive. People stop sharing ideas openly because they are focused on protecting their position rather than advancing a shared cause. Success becomes a solitary experience rather than a collective one. This pattern is especially visible in environments that reward performance without reinforcing purpose. When achievement is celebrated but meaning is ignored, people learn to chase approval instead of alignment. They measure their worth by promotions, titles, or income, and when those markers lose their novelty, motivation collapses. The question quietly emerges, is this all there is? And when that question has no answer, emotional exhaustion sets in. The absence of a clear why also distorts decision-making. Without a guiding purpose, success becomes reactive. People say yes to opportunities because they look impressive, not because they are meaningful. Organizations pursue growth because it is expected, not because it serves a mission. Over time, this creates a sense of drift. Progress continues, but direction is lost. The bus keeps moving, but no one is sure where it is headed. Burnout thrives in this uncertainty. When people do not see how their effort connects to something larger, every demand feels like a cost with no return. Long hours feel exploitative rather than noble. Sacrifices feel unrecognized rather than valued. Even positive feedback rings hollow because it reinforces performance, not purpose. The human need for significance remains unmet. Disconnection also shows up as cynicism. People begin to question leadership motives. They stop believing in stated values because daily behavior does not reflect them. Trust erodes quietly, not through dramatic failures, but through consistent misalignment between words and actions. When success is prioritized over purpose, integrity becomes optional, and people feel that they must choose between belonging and authenticity. On an individual level, success without why creates an identity crisis. When life is organized around achievement, the self becomes fragile. Failure feels catastrophic because there's no deeper foundation to fall back on. Even success becomes stressful because it must be maintained at all costs. Rest feels undeserved. Slowing down feels dangerous. The person becomes defined by output rather than values. Purpose provides what success alone cannot. It gives context to effort and meaning to sacrifice. It reminds people that they are contributing to something that transcends personal gain. When the why is clear, work becomes an extension of values rather than a drain on them. People feel connected to their role, their team, and the impact they are making, even when the work is difficult. Organizations that articulate and live their why create environments where success is sustainable. They recognize that people are not resources to be optimized, but human beings to be supported. They invest in trust, ecological safety, and shared belief. In these cultures, success does not isolate individuals, it strengthens bonds. Achievement becomes a reflection of collective purpose rather than individual survival. Without a clear why, success demands more and more while giving less and less in return. It asks people to run faster without explaining why the race matters. It rewards endurance but ignores meaning. Eventually, the body slows, the mind disconnects, and the heart searches for something that feels real, human, and worthy of sustained commitment. Fear-based, short-term leadership erodes trust in weakened systems because fear may produce compliance, but it destroys belief. When leaders rely on pressure, urgency, and consequences to drive performance, they may see immediate results, but those results come at a hidden cost. People stop feeling safe. they stop feeling valued. And once trust begins to disappear, the very system meant to produce success starts to hollow out from the inside. Fear changes how people behave. In fear-based environments, individuals do not ask what is right, they ask what is safe. They do not share ideas. They protect themselves. They do not collaborate. They compete. The energy that should be used for creativity, problem-solving, and service is redirected towards survival. People become cautious, guarded, and reactive. They comply with instructions, but they withhold commitment. And while compliance looks productive on paper, it is brittle in practice. Short-term leadership amplifies this damage. When leaders are focused primarily on immediate outcomes, quarterly targets, or personal advancement, decisions are made for speed rather than sustainability. Long-term consequences are ignored. People are pushed harder instead of supported better. Systems are stretched instead of strengthened. In the rush to deliver fast results, trust is treated as expendable, even though trust is the very thing that allows organizations to endure pressure over time. Trust is not built through authority. It is built through consistency, empathy, and integrity. When leaders lead through fear, their words and actions become unpredictable. Priorities shift based on pressure rather than principles. Today's values are abandoned tomorrow for convenience. People notice this, even if it is never openly discussed. And when values feel negotiable, belief disappears. Once trust is broken, systems begin to fail quietly. Communication becomes filtered. Bad news travels slowly or not at all. People tell leaders what they think they want to hear instead of what they need to know. Problems grow in the shadows until they become crises. Innovation declines because risk feels unsafe. Learning stops because mistakes are punished instead of examined. The organization may still move forward, but it does so blindly. Fear-based leadership also weakens relationships between leaders and their people. Instead of feeling protected, individuals feel used. Instead of feeling inspired, they feel managed. Loyalty becomes conditional, lasting only as long as the fear remains stronger than the opportunity to leave. The moment people find a safer environment, they disengage emotionally or physically. Turnover increases. Institutional knowledge is lost. Stability erodes. Short-term thinking reinforces this cycle. Leaders who prioritize immediate results often justify harmful behavior as necessary pressure. They tell themselves that once the goal is reached, things will improve. But the culture they create does not reset after the deadline passes. Fear leaves residue. People remember how they were treated when things were difficult. They remember who listened and who threatened. They remember whether leadership stood by its values or abandoned them when it mattered most. Strong systems are built for stress, not just success. They are designed to absorb pressure without breaking trust. Fear-based systems do the opposite. They perform only when conditions are controlled. When uncertainty increases, they fracture. People panic, silos form. Blame replaces accountability. The system becomes reactive rather than resilient. Human-centered leadership understands that trust is not a soft concept. It is a strategic asset. Teams with high trust move faster, adapt better, and recover stronger. They do not waste energy watching their backs. They focus on the mission because they believe the system will support them. This kind of trust cannot be rushed. It cannot be demanded. And it cannot coexist with fear. Leadership grounded in long-term thinking recognizes that people are not tools to extract results from, but partners in a shared cause. These leaders make decisions that protect trust even when it costs them speed. They choose clarity over intimidation. They create environments where people feel safe to speak, to challenge, and to fail forward. Over time, these systems grow stronger because they are built on belief rather than pressure. Fear-based leadership may appear efficient, but it is inefficient at scale and destructive over time. It creates organizations that look strong until they are tested, and leaders who appear decisive until trust is required. Without trust, no system can sustain excellence because people will always give less of themselves to a place where fear is louder than purpose and control is valued more than care. Purpose-driven leadership prioritizes people over results because it understands that results are produced by humans, not the other way around. When leaders place people at the center of their decisions, they are not ignoring performance. They are protecting the conditions that make performance sustainable. This kind of leadership recognizes that human energy, trust, and belief are finite resources. And if they are depleted, no amount of pressure or incentive can compensate for the loss. Resilience is not built in moments of comfort. It is built in environments where people feel safe enough to struggle, honest enough to speak, and supported enough to recover. Purpose-driven leaders invest in these environments deliberately. They ask not only what needs to be achieved, but who is being affected and how. They understand that the long-term strength of any system depends on the well-being of the individuals within it. When people feel prioritized, they are more willing to give discretionary effort. They show up not because they are afraid of consequences, but because they believe in the mission and trust the leadership. This trust becomes the foundation of resilience. In times of uncertainty, people do not scatter or withdraw, they lean in. They adapt. They support one another. The system bends without breaking because the relationships inside it are strong. Results-focused leadership often mistakes pressure for progress. It assumes that harder pushing will lead to better outcomes. In reality, constant pressure narrows thinking, increases anxiety, and accelerates burnout. Purpose-driven leadership takes a different approach. It recognizes that clarity reduces stress more effectively than force. When people understand why their work matters, they are better able to navigate challenges without losing motivation or direction. Prioritizing people does not mean lowering standards, it means raising responsibility. Purpose-driven leaders hold themselves accountable for creating conditions where people can succeed. They invest in development rather than extraction. They listen before they decide. They measure success not only by output, but by growth, trust, and sustainability. This creates a culture where learning is valued and mistakes are treated as opportunities to improve rather than reasons to punish. Resilient organizations are not immune to failure. They are prepared for it. When setbacks occur, purpose-driven leaders do not search for someone to blame. They focus on understanding what happened and how to respond together. This approach preserves dignity and reinforces trust. People feel confident that they will not be discarded when things go wrong, which encourages honesty and accountability. At a human level, being prioritized restores meaning to work. People feel seen as individuals, not just functions. They feel that their contribution matters beyond numbers on a report. This sense of belonging strengthens emotional resilience. When work is connected to values, stress is contextualized rather than overwhelming. Challenges feel purposeful instead of draining. Purpose-driven leadership also creates resilience by encouraging long-term thinking. Leaders resist the temptation to sacrifice people for short-term gains. They make decisions that may slow progress today but ensure strength tomorrow. They recognize that trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild and that no result is worth the erosion of belief. By protecting people, they protect the future of the organization. In times of crisis, the difference becomes clear. Teams led by fear fracture under pressure. Teams led by purpose hold together. They communicate openly. They support one another. They remain focused on what truly matters. The leader does not become the sole source of strength. The system itself becomes resilient because everyone feels responsible for its survival. Purpose-driven leadership ultimately understands a simple truth: people are the system. When people are cared for, the system thrives. When people are ignored, the system weakens regardless of short-term success. By prioritizing human well-being, trust, and meaning, leaders create organizations that can endure change, recover from setbacks, and continue forward with clarity and strength rooted in shared purpose and collective belief. Sustainable motivation comes from serving something bigger than oneself, because human beings are not designed to be the sole source of their own meaning. When effort is directed only toward personal gain, recognition, or survival, motivation becomes fragile and easily exhausted. The self can only carry so much weight. The moment challenges arise, energy collapses inward, and purpose begins to feel heavy rather than empowering. When people attach their work to something larger than their own success, motivation shifts from consumption to contribution. The question changes from what do I get to who do I serve? This shift transforms effort into intention. Sacrifice becomes meaningful because it is no longer about proving worth, but about fulfilling responsibility. People endure discomfort not because they must, but because they believe the cause deserves it. Serving something bigger than oneself creates emotional endurance. Personal motivation fluctuates with mood, circumstance, and reward. A sense of service provides stability. Even on difficult days, people can continue because the mission remains relevant regardless of how they feel. This is why individuals committed to causes, communities, or values often display extraordinary resilience. Their energy is replenished by meaning, not praise. In environments where self-interest dominates, motivation is constantly negotiated. People calculate effort against reward. When the balance feels unfair, engagement declines. Serving a larger purpose dissolves this constant negotiation. Effort is no longer transactional. It becomes relational. People feel connected to the impact of their work, to the people who benefit from it, and to the values it represents. This connection sustains motivation long after external incentives lose their power. Organizations that emphasize service over self-interest build cultures of shared responsibility. When people believe their work contributes to something meaningful, collaboration increases. Competition gives way to cooperation. Individuals support one another because success is collective rather than individual. Motivation becomes a property of the system, not a trait of the individual. The culture itself reinforces commitment. Serving something larger also protects against burnout. Burnout thrives in isolation and self-focus. When people feel alone in their struggle, effort feels endless and unrewarded. A sense of service places struggle in context. Challenges are seen as part of a larger story rather than personal failures. This perspective reduces emotional fatigue and strengthens psychological resilience. Leadership plays a critical role in cultivating this kind of motivation. Leaders who frame work as service elevate daily tasks into acts of contribution. They remind people who benefits from their effort and why it matters. They model humility and responsibility rather than ego and entitlement. In doing so, they create environments where motivation is renewed through meaning rather than enforced through pressure. Serving something bigger than oneself also reshapes identity. People stop defining themselves solely by titles, status, or outcomes. They see themselves as part of a cause, a team, or a mission. This identity is more stable because it is rooted in values rather than performance. Failure becomes a lesson rather than a verdict. Success becomes a shared achievement rather than a personal trophy. On a societal level, sustainable motivation rooted in service strengthens communities. When individuals act with a sense of responsibility to others, trust increases. Systems become more humane. Progress is measured not only by growth, but by well-being. People feel that their effort contributes to a future worth building, which inspires continued engagement even when results are slow. Serving something bigger than oneself does not eliminate ambition, it gives ambition direction. Goals still matter, but they are guided by values. Achievement becomes a means, not an end. Motivation stops being a resource that must be constantly replenished and becomes a steady force driven by belief, connection, and responsibility. When people align their work with a cause that transcends personal gain, effort gains dignity, perseverance gains meaning, and motivation becomes rooted in something enduring that extends beyond the self and into the lives and futures of others. All of this leads to a simple but demanding truth. The way forward is not more pressure, louder motivation, or faster results. The way forward is purpose. When we remember why we exist, why our work matters, and who we are truly serving, everything changes. Motivation stops being something we chase and becomes something we carry. Leadership stops being about control and becomes an act of responsibility. Success stops being hollow and starts to feel earned, shared, and sustainable. Each of us has a choice. To keep optimizing for short-term wins that exhaust people and weaken systems, or to build something that lasts by putting humans at the center. To lead through fear, or to lead through trust. To work for outcomes alone, or to commit ourselves to a cause bigger than personal gain. The future will not be shaped by those who demand the most, but by those who care the most. The leaders we need are not defined by authority or ambition, but by clarity of purpose and courage of service. And the moment we choose to lead with why, we stop managing motivation and start inspiring a movement that outlives us.